Hello and welcome. In this video, we will be going through what an absolute position does, and we will try and set an element with an absolute position so that we know how it behaves. I have got my sample web page on the right, and I've got the code responsible for the page on the left. The focus here is going to be on these two boxes. They are divs. Div 1, I've created div 1 first and then embedded div 2 inside div 1. So currently they are positioned the way they have been created in a hierarchical manner on the document. So if you notice, the title, the heading, which is the H1, position first. Next is the paragraph, which went there, and then the first div with the purple background, and then the second div with the orange border. So at the moment, the page is structured or displayed in order the elements were created. So if I have a look at the page the way it is now, so this is how the page is. Observe the purple box. I'm going to apply a relative position to the purple box, but notice this will not change. Okay, so let's take the comment off that. So I've now given the purple box, or the box with a purple border, I've given it a position of relative. So if I run that and expand that, as I said, it did not change a thing. The reason it hasn't changed is because despite being given the value of relative in position, we haven't specified any change in the order. For example, we haven't specified to alter the top, the right, the bottom, or the left properties. Even though we've set to be relative, we haven't changed anything. When an element is relative, it's still considered to be in the normal flow of the elements in the document. So they are still considered static until something is changed via the right, top, right, bottom, left corners. Those properties they can use to affect them. I am going to give the second box an absolute positioning. What an absolute positioning does, it will position the element relative to the nearest position ancestor. So in this case, the nearest position ancestor will be div 1 because div 1 has a relative position. So let's take a look at that. What I've said here, giving it position absolute, I've set the top 95 pixels and the right no value. So it's going to move 95 pixels. It's going to position itself to the top corner of div 1. So let's take a look at that. You see that? So this is what he's done. He's moved 95 pixels top of this border. So the purple border is relative and this is absolute. So it's absolute relative to its nearest ancestor. And the nearest ancestor is div 1 because it's got a relative position. If div 1 did not have, or if this div 2 did not have the nearest ancestor, it will assume the position of the page. So if the nearest ancestor does not exist, it will position itself absolutely relative to the initial container, and the initial container here will be the page. What I have done, I have commented out the position property for div1. So div1 is no longer relative in position. So if I save that, you notice that the div2 will now be positioned with the page, because the page will be the nearest ancestor because it hasn't got a nearest one. So let's have a look at that. I go run. So remember, initially this div2 box with absolute positioning was inside this one because this box here had a relative position. So now, because this, I've removed that, it's now positioned itself to the initial container, which becomes the nearest ancestor. So elements that are positioned with absolute positioning will always position themselves nearest to the in relative to the nearest ancestor. If the nearest ancestor does not exist, it will position itself absolutely relatively to the initial container, as I've explained with this page and previously with the div. I've reset that back now, so I've given the div now a relative positioning. So the orange box should position inside this, because this div1 becomes the nearest relative ancestor. So this is how an absolute position works. In this video, I covered how the absolute positioning works. It works in relative to the nearest positioned ancestor. So for an element to have a position of absolute, it must be positioned relative to the nearest positioned ancestor. If the nearest positioned ancestor does not exist, it will position itself relative to the initial container. Thank you so much. I hope this video has been helpful and giving you an understanding of how absolute positioning works. It works in relative to the nearest ancestor. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.